There's a dangerous lie you were taught from a young age, that transparency is always a virtue. The more you open up, the more trust you generate. The more you explain, the more people respect you. But in the real world, the exact opposite happens. The more you talk, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you are, the easier you are to control. And nobody told you this, but the men who truly accumulate power, those who understand human nature without romanticizing it. They don't tell everything. They are watching. They filter. They choose what to reveal. And most importantly, what never to reveal. Not because they're cold, but because they understand that in the game of life, exposed information becomes a point of pressure. And here's the part that might bother you. Perhaps you're not being transparent. Perhaps you're being naive, revealing their limits, their plans, their fears, and without realizing it, handing over the keys to their own position. But the good news is simple and uncomfortable. You don't need to change who you are. You need to change how much you show, because when you learn to control what comes out of you, you begin to control what reaches you. And that's exactly what you're about to understand. 7 things powerful men never reveal, and how this completely changes the way the world reacts to you. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now, not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. He rarely realizes it, but every time someone firmly says, "I would never do that," they are, without realizing it, handing over a complete map of how they can be pressured. It seems counterintuitive, but that's exactly how the game works in the real world, not in an ideal world. Anyone who understands even a little about strategy, human nature, or even the prince, knows that politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires selective silence. When you explicitly reveal your ethical limits, you're not demonstrating character. You're drawing a visible fence, easy to circumvent. And those who play the game of life seriously, aware that often the end justifies the means, don't ignore this kind of information. On the contrary, they use it, not necessarily to destroy you, but to understand how far they can go without losing you. That's why men who accumulate real power avoid declaring their limits as slogans. They live by their principles, but they don't announce them like an open manual. Because deep down, they know that better to be feared than loved only works when the other person can't completely predict their reaction. Now, consider a simple, almost everyday scene. A work environment. Someone says, "I would never step on anyone to get ahead." Sounds noble, right? But in practice, this phrase creates a dangerous comfort zone around that person. They are signaling that faced with extreme pressure, they will likely retreat. And this, to a more strategic observer, reveals much more than it should. Herein lies one of the most ignored foundations of virtu and fortuna, the ability to adapt without exposing oneself. Constant adaptability isn't about changing values all the time, but about not displaying them all like open cards on the table. Think of someone who grows silently within a company, without declaring themselves against everything, without constantly raising flags. They observe, learn, decide based on real human nature, and act when necessary. It's not about being unethical. It's about not being predictable, because predictability in this game is vulnerability disguised as virtue. And perhaps here lies the most uncomfortable point of all. The appearance of virtue is often more strategic than the virtue itself. This doesn't mean being false. It means being intelligent in how you present yourself. A man who masters the calculated use of force doesn't show all his limits. He leaves doubts. And doubt, in this context, is protection. Imagine someone who never states how far they'll go, but also never allows themselves to be surpassed. This kind of presence creates automatic, almost instinctive respect. Avoiding being hated, but also not being completely deciphered. That's the balance. And it's precisely at this point that a silent question begins to emerge. If revealing your limits weakens your position, what about something even more exposed and visible? How much effort do you put in? Because without realizing it, this could be the next power leak that almost no one notices. There's a very common, almost childish misconception that showing how hard you work increases the value of what you do. But in the real game, the opposite is true. When someone explicitly states the sacrifice behind each result, they unknowingly reduce the final impact. Because in human perception, what seems difficult loses its aura, and what seems natural gains power. This is the silent principle of sprezzatura, making what demanded everything from you seem easy. It's not a lie, it's strategy. Anyone who understands social dynamics, influence, and especially politics guided by reality, not ideals, knows that the world rewards the appearance of dominance, not the confession of effort. And here's a subtle point. Machiavelli already indicated that the perception others have of you often weighs more than your essence. If everything you do is accompanied by, "It was difficult, I killed myself to achieve this," you're not showing strength, you're showing cost. Now think of two people. One says, "Man, I stayed up 3 nights to finish this project." The other simply delivers, clean, precise, without drama. Who do you think inspires more confidence? Who seems more prepared to handle pressure? The world, almost cruelly, associates lightness with competence. And this isn't about devaluing effort, it's about understanding the psychological effect it generates when exposed. The calculated use of force here is exactly that, hiding the effort, showing the result. Big names, businessmen, leaders, even historical figures, rarely narrate the suffering while they are climbing. They maintain a constant, almost cold line, as if everything were under control. And this creates something powerful, silent authority. Because whoever doesn't seem to be desperately fighting seems to have already won. And here's an even more strategic point. When you reveal too much about how much something cost, you also reveal how much you need it to succeed. And that, at its core, is exposed vulnerability. Virtù and fortuna go hand in hand, but virtù, this ability to act with mastery, requires that you don't demonstrate emotional dependence on the outcome. Constant adaptability also involves this: knowing when to show intensity and when to appear unshakable. Because in the power game, whoever seems too needy loses negotiating power. And almost imperceptibly, this opens up space for something even more critical. If showing effort reveals dependence, what happens when you reveal that you have an escape route, an alternative plan, a plan B? There's a type of weakness that doesn't seem like weakness, but it is, and it appears when someone reveals they have a plan B. At first glance, this sounds intelligent, prudent, even responsible. But in the real game, where decisions are made based on real human nature, this communicates something very specific: a lack of total commitment. And here comes one of the most uncomfortable ideas to accept. Whoever knows you have an escape route knows exactly where to pressure you. Because deep down, you've already made it clear that there's an invisible limit where you'll give up. And, in many contexts, this completely changes the power dynamic. Machiavelli already implied this. Whoever enters a battle with an easy way out rarely commands respect, because the perception is simple. If you put pressure on them, they retreat. And this, silently, reduces your authority even before the game begins. Now, consider a negotiation, for example. Two people discussing a deal. One of them lets slip. If it doesn't work out, I have another option. Sounds like a power play, right? Wrong. In practice, this reveals two things. First, that they are not fully committed to that outcome. Second, that they can be pushed to the breaking point. And whoever understands the game, whoever masters the calculated use of force, goes exactly to that point, because they know there is a way out. Now compare that to someone who reveals absolutely nothing. No alternative plan, no hesitation, no visible route. This person becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability at this level generates immediate respect. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, isn't about literal fear. It's about the other person not being able to predict your giving up. And when someone can't predict that, they think twice before testing. But here's where strategic refinement comes in. This doesn't mean you shouldn't have a plan B. On the contrary, virtù and fortuna demand preparation. Constant adaptability requires alternatives. The difference lies in not exposing them. You can have 10 exit routes, but none of them should be visible to those negotiating with you, competing with you, or trying to read you. Because the moment your exit strategy becomes known, it ceases to be a strategy and becomes a limitation. And visible limitations are pressure points. Avoiding being hated also involves this. Not creating unnecessary friction, but also not putting yourself in a position of weakness. And it is precisely here that a new, even more subtle layer emerges. If hiding your plan B increases your strength, what about hiding something even more powerful? The true extent of your intelligence. There's a silent mistake many people make when they start to evolve. They feel the need to prove how much they know. They want to demonstrate quick thinking, technical knowledge, strategic vision, all at once. But in the real game, the one Machiavelli observed with surgical precision, this rarely works in your favor. On the contrary, when you fully reveal the extent of your intelligence, you lose one of the greatest possible advantages, the element of surprise. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, teaches exactly that. It's not about being smarter, but about being more strategic in how that intelligence manifests itself. Because when everyone knows exactly how far you can think, they start protecting themselves even before you act. Now imagine two people in a meeting. One answers everything, anticipates problems, corrects others, and demonstrates absolute mastery. The other observes, speaks little, asks simple questions, sometimes even seeming not to fully understand. Who do you think is underestimated? And who do you think catches everyone off guard later? That's the game. Pretending to know less isn't ignorance, it's positioning. Calculated use of force is also this, knowing when to apply it and especially when to conceal it. Great strategists throughout history, leaders, negotiators, even investors, frequently adopt this behavior. They let others talk too much, expose themselves too much, while they gather information. And at the right moment, they act with precision. Virtù and fortuna here meet at an essential point: control of perception. Because those who are underestimated are rarely confronted with full force. And perhaps that's the most powerful point of all. When you show everything you know, you also set the limit of your ability in the eyes of others. You become predictable. And predictability in this game is limitation. Constant adaptability demands that you never be fully deciphered. The appearance of virtue, in this context, also transforms into the appearance of simplicity. It's not about seeming weak, It's about not seeming totally threatening before the time is right. Better to be feared than loved, yes, but at the right moment, not all the time. Because anticipated fear generates resistance. Underestimation, on the other hand, generates carelessness, and carelessness is where the game changes. And here a new, even more delicate layer emerges. If hiding your intelligence protects you, what happens when you reveal something even more sensitive and unstable? Your financial situation. Few things change how people treat you as much as their perception of your money. And the most curious thing is that it doesn't matter if you have a lot or a little. In both cases, revealing too much tends to create problems. In an ideal world, this shouldn't matter. But as we've seen, politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the game is different. When someone exposes financial difficulties, they open themselves up to devaluation, pressure, and in some cases, even manipulation. When they expose abundance, they attract interest, envy, and opportunism. In other words, regardless of which side you're on, you start to be seen through a filter you no longer control. Machiavelli already implied that power lies not only in what you have, but in what others believe you have or are unsure of. And this uncertainty, when used well, transforms into protection. Now think of someone who constantly comments, "I'm strapped for cash. This month was tough. I need to close this deal." Without realizing it, this person is creating an aura of urgency around themselves. And urgency in this context is fragility. Those who negotiate with them perceive this and adjust their behavior. They apply more pressure, offer less, demand more. On the other hand, someone who constantly flaunts their wealth, trips, earnings, numbers, also enters a dangerous game, because they become seen as a resource, not as a person, and this triggers predictable behaviors, self-serving approaches, unrealistic expectations, even attempts at exploitation. The calculated use of force here is exactly that, strategic neutrality. Neither exposed scarcity nor blatant abundance, just perceived stability, and stability in the power game generates silent respect. And there's an even deeper detail. When you reveal your financial situation, you also reveal your level of dependence. Virtue and fortune demand freedom of action. Constant adaptability requires room for maneuver. But when others know exactly how much you need to earn, how much you can lose, or how much you can endure, they begin to understand your invisible limits. And limits, as we've seen, are pressure points. Avoiding being hated also involves not arousing unnecessary envy and not demonstrating open financial vulnerability. The appearance of virtue here transforms into the appearance of balance, because those who seem stable negotiate better, choose better, and are treated differently. And it is precisely at this point that an even more human question arises. If exposed money generates distortions, what happens when you expose something even more intimate, your resentments and enemies? Few things reveal as much about someone as what they intensely criticize, and that's where the risk lies. When you talk too much about who irritates you, who hurt you, or who you consider an enemy, you're not just venting, you're exposing your emotional triggers with surgical precision. And in the real game, that's gold for the observer. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires you to understand one simple thing. People don't just use their qualities, they use their reactions. Machiavelli already pointed out, albeit implicitly, that understanding what provokes someone is one of the greatest forms of indirect control. And when you make that clear repeatedly in conversations, social media, or even in moments of trust, you're handing over a manual on how to destabilize yourself. Now observe this in everyday life. Someone starts saying, "I can't stand fake people. So-and-so betrayed me. So-and-so is manipulative. It seems like just a venting session, right? But for a more strategic observer, this reveals patterns. What hurts you, what activates you, where you lose control. And here comes the most delicate point. Whoever knows where you lose control, controls you without needing to confront you directly. The calculated use of force in this case can be subtle, a slight provocation, a specific situation, an indirect reminder, and that's it, you react. And the moment you react emotionally, you lose ground. Better to be feared than loved also involves this. Not in the sense of intimidating, but of not being easily triggered. Because whoever reacts easily is predictable, and emotional predictability is one of the greatest weaknesses in the power game. But there's an even deeper layer to all this. When you constantly talk about your enemies, you keep those enemies alive inside you. Virtue and fortune require focus, and focus doesn't mix well with energy scattered in resentment. Constant adaptability demands movement, and resentment traps you in the past. The appearance of virtue here transforms into the appearance of emotional neutrality. It's not about not feeling, it's about not exposing everything you feel. Avoiding being hated also involves not fueling unnecessary conflicts publicly, because often true power lies not in defeating the enemy, but in not allowing them access to your inner self. And it is precisely at this point that an even more strategic question arises. If revealing your resentments weakens you, what happens when you reveal what you are silently building? Your grand plan. There's an almost irresistible feeling when you start something big, the urge to tell, to share the plan, the vision, what you're building, as if talking about it makes everything more real. But in practice, the opposite happens. When you announce your goals prematurely, you start spending emotional energy on validation, not execution. And this, silently, weakens the process. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that the world doesn't reward intention, it rewards results. Machiavelli already made it clear, albeit indirectly, that strategic moves are more effective when invisible until the right moment. Because while you speak, others think. And while others think, they can interfere. Sometimes not out of malice, but out of projection, opinion, or even envy disguised as advice. Now imagine someone announcing, "I'm going to open a business. I'm going to change fields. I'm going to launch something big." Immediately, opinions arise. Some positive, others not. But they all have an effect. They occupy mental space. And more than that, they create a false sense of progress. The brain almost treacherously understands that you have already advanced simply by speaking. And this reduces the internal urgency to act. The calculated use of force here is completely different. Silence while building, impact when revealing. Great movements, when made in silence, have a much stronger effect when they appear ready. Virtu and fortuna walk hand in hand at this point. You prepare, adjust, adapt, without noise. And when it emerges with weight. Because it wasn't discussed. It was executed. And there's another, even more subtle risk. When you share your plan, you also allow others to anticipate it. Constant adaptability requires flexibility. But this is lost when the plan is exposed. People can copy, block, and compete before you even truly begin. Avoiding being hated also involves not creating public expectations that you don't yet know if you can sustain. The appearance of virtue here transforms into the appearance of normality, while behind the scenes you build something much bigger. Because in the end, real power doesn't make noise, it appears. And it's precisely at this point that the most interesting transition of all arises. If hiding information is so powerful, how do you navigate the world without seeming too closed off, without seeming distant? That's where two silent techniques that few master come in. There's a huge difference between being closed off and being strategically selective. And those who master this rarely seem distant. On the contrary, they seem approachable, easygoing, even pleasant. But at the same time, they never give everything away. And this is where two silent techniques that have spanned centuries of strategy come in, even without being directly named by Machiavelli: the calculated minor confession and the method of the boring response, known as grey rock. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands this kind of refinement. It's not enough to know what to hide. You need to know how to interact without raising suspicion. Because the real game isn't about being closed off. It's about controlling the flow of information without appearing to be controlling it. A calculated minor confession functions as a clever exchange. You give something away, but not the essential part. It's like offering a rock to hide the mountain. For example, someone asks about your financial life. Instead of completely shutting down, which might seem awkward, you respond with something neutral, superficial, but truthful enough. "I'm organizing my finances better this year." That's it. You answered, without revealing anything relevant. The calculated use of force here is subtle. You don't block, you redirect. This also applies to plans, emotions, even opinions. You offer a reduced version of the truth, enough to keep the interaction flowing, but without exposing your strategic core. Virtù and fortuna at this point appear in the ability to dose, neither absolute silence nor total exposure, just enough. The method of the boring response, the famous grey rock, is even more powerful in environments where someone is trying to provoke you, extract a reaction, or obtain information. The idea is simple. You become uninteresting to those seeking something from you. Short, neutral answers, without emotion, without energy. For example, someone insists on knowing about your plans or tries to provoke you with indirect comments. Instead of reacting, you respond with something like, "I'm still looking into that. Maybe. Let's see." No confrontation, no explanation, no openness. Constant adaptability here means knowing when to engage and when to disappear within the conversation itself. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, becomes something more refined, not being easily accessible. Avoiding being hated, but also not being exploited. And it is precisely at this point that the last layer emerges, the only exception where opening up can be a strength, as long as it's with the right person. After all this, it might seem that the only way forward is to shut yourself off from the world, but it's not. Anyone who deeply understands strategy knows that absolute isolation doesn't generate power, it generates distortion. Because without a reliable mirror, you begin to lose the ability to see yourself clearly. And this is where the only conscious exception in this game comes in: a trustworthy person, chosen with extreme care. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands this choice, not based on emotion, but on competence and the absence of conflict of interest. It's not just any friend, not just any colleague, not just anyone who wants what's best for you. And it's someone who can see you without needing you, and precisely for that reason can be truly honest. Think about the difference between someone who validates you and someone who confronts you. The first keeps you comfortable. The second makes you grow. The strategic mirror is this second figure. It could be a mentor, a therapist, a highly competent partner, someone who doesn't depend on you emotionally and therefore doesn't need to soften the truth. Machiavelli, observing leaders and power structures, implicitly conveyed something essential. Those who don't listen to advice make blind decisions. But there's a crucial detail. It's not about listening to everyone. It's about carefully choosing who has access to your inner vision. Calculated use of force is also this, opening up only where there is strategic security. Virtù and fortuna at this point require maturity, knowing that you are not infallible, but also knowing that you cannot expose yourself to just anyone. And here's the most refined point of all. This openness isn't emotional, it's functional. It's not about venting without a filter, but about calibrating decisions, adjusting course, and identifying blind spots. Constant adaptability depends on this, because those who don't adapt stagnate. Avoiding being hated also involves not carrying everything alone until you explode. The appearance of virtue, here, transforms into the appearance of inner balance, someone who seems centered because they have somewhere to organize the chaos away from the eyes of the world. And when this dynamic is well constructed, silence ceases to be merely protection and begins to transform into something much greater. Because in the end, well-used silence isn't absence, it's accumulation. And that's exactly what defines the presence of someone who truly understands the game. Now answer me honestly. How many times have you opened up too much, and then you realized that it was used against you? How many times have you over-explained, and in the end, did he emerge from the conversation in a weaker position? And perhaps most importantly, how many times have you confused transparency with unnecessary vulnerability? Because in the end, it's not about shutting yourself off from the world. It's about stopping exposing yourself to those who don't deserve access. What you reveal defines how the world reads you, and how the world reads you defines how it treats you. If you give everything away, your limits, your plans, your emotions, you're not being authentic, you're being predictable. And predictability in this game is a disguised weakness. Now think about this. What if starting today, you began to speak less, observe more, and to choose precisely what is worth revealing? What if you stopped explaining everything, and then it started to raise doubts? Because when in doubt, where respect is born. So I'll leave you with a simple challenge. What are you talking about too much today, and what should I be keeping quiet about? If this content made sense to you, if at any point you found yourself here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because in the next videos, you'll start to see the game in a new light. And once you see, you can never not see again.